It started with a laugh. Not the kind of laugh that makes you feel warm or loved, the kind that slices through your chest and leaves you bleeding inside. I can still hear it. We were sitting at the dinner table, candles flickering between us, when my husband, James, smirked across his glass of wine and said, "Face it, Claire, you're broken. You'll never give me a child." The fork clattered from my hand. I'd been bracing for another jab all evening, but this one cut deeper. Infertile. Broken. He said it like it was a joke, but his eyes carried no humor, just contempt. My throat tightened, but I forced a smile, because that's what years of marriage to James had taught me. Swallow the pain, pretend it doesn't sting, keep the peace at all costs. But that night, something shifted. Somewhere deep inside, beneath the layers of humiliation and exhaustion, a spark flickered to life. I hadn't always been this quiet, obedient woman. When James and I first met in college, I was fiery, ambitious, full of dreams. He was charming then, attentive, even protective. But little by little, his charm twisted into control. Every decision had to go through him. My clothes, my friends, my career choices. And when the doctor told us after a year of trying that the problem lay with me, that I had less than a 5% chance of conceiving naturally, James latched onto it like ammunition. He never missed an opportunity to remind me of my failure. At dinner parties, he'd joke that Claire only knows how to raise spreadsheets, not babies. Our friends would laugh nervously, and I'd laugh too, even as my stomach knotted. I thought if I just loved him enough, proved myself enough, he'd stop. He never did. The worst part wasn't the mockery. It was the silence afterward. James would roll over in bed, satisfied with himself, while I stared at the ceiling, tears sliding into my hairline. I begged him to consider adoption, to think about fostering anything. He sneered at the idea. "Why would I raise someone else's mistake?" He spat once, his voice dripping with disgust. That was when I realized he didn't just think I was broken, he thought children without his DNA were beneath him. Still, I stayed, because walking away meant admitting my marriage was a mistake, admitting I'd wasted years, because I was afraid of starting over with nothing, because part of me still remembered the boy he had been, the one who'd once held my hand under the stars and promised me forever. But forever, I learned, can be a cage. One night, after another cruel remark about how I'd never be enough, I slipped into the bathroom, locked the door, and sank onto the cold tile floor. My reflection stared back at me from the mirror, pale, hollow-eyed, unrecognizable. And for the first time, I whispered to myself, "You don't have to stay." That whisper became my lifeline. Over the next few months, I secretly funneled money from my job into a hidden account. I began reaching out to an old friend, someone James hated because she encouraged me to be independent. Her name was Melissa. She worked at a local women's shelter, and when I finally confessed everything, James's cruelty, his control, his disgust at the thought of adoption, she squeezed my hand and said, "Claire, you're not broken, you're trapped, and you can get out." When I left James, it wasn't dramatic. No shouting, no bags thrown on the lawn, just a note on the counter and a heart pounding so hard I thought it would burst as I walked out the door with nothing but a suitcase and my grandmother's necklace. James didn't chase me. He didn't even call. In his mind, I was disposable, a wife who couldn't give him what he wanted, a liability erased. What he didn't know, what he could never know, was that leaving him was the first step toward a secret I would guard with my life. Because while James mocked me for being infertile, life had other plans. It happened 6 months later. I was volunteering at the shelter where Melissa worked, helping with paperwork when a young woman walked in, clutching a bundle wrapped in a hospital blanket. She couldn't have been more than 16, her eyes swollen from crying. She placed the bundle in Melissa's arms and whispered, "I can't do this. I can't raise her. Please, find her someone who can." Melissa tried to comfort her, but the girl shook her head and ran out the door. I looked down at the bundle, at the tiny face peeking from the folds of cloth. She was perfect. Pink cheeks, a button nose, a tuft of dark hair. And in that instant, something inside me shattered and healed all at once. Melissa placed the baby in my arms. "Claire," she said gently, "don't." But I couldn't help it. I cradled her, and she opened her eyes the color of twilight, and I knew this was the child James had sworn I could never have, the child who would one day rewrite every cruel word he had ever spoken. That night, I made a decision. I named her Lila, and though the adoption process was long, grueling, and filled with battles I can't even describe, I fought for her with everything I had. Every court date, every home inspection, every form, I did it all. And when the papers were finally signed, when I became her mother in every way that mattered, I whispered into her tiny ear, "You're mine, and no one can ever take you away from me." James thought I was infertile. James thought I was broken. But Lila became the proof that I was whole, that love didn't need blood to be real, that sometimes the family you choose is stronger than the family you're given. And here's the part that will make you lean closer. 15 years later, James came crawling back. And this time, he wasn't laughing. He was begging. 15 years is a long time, but the scars of James's cruelty never really faded. In the early years after I left, I lived in a tiny one-bedroom apartment with Lila. The walls were thin, the heat barely worked in the winter, and I often had to choose between groceries or electricity. But even in those moments, even when I was scraping peanut butter onto stale bread and humming lullabies by candlelight, I felt freer than I ever had in James's mansion. Because in that cramped apartment, I wasn't broken, I wasn't mocked, I was a mother. Raising Lila wasn't easy. She was bright, curious, and strong-willed from the start. She had this way of asking questions that forced me to confront truths I'd buried deep. "Mommy, why don't I have a daddy like the other kids at school?" she asked one day when she was 6. My throat tightened, but I knelt down and smoothed her hair. "Because some daddies don't know how to love the right way," I told her. "But you don't need him. You have me, and I'll always be enough." She studied me for a long moment, then nodded as if she understood more than she should. That night, she curled up against me and whispered, "I don't need a daddy. I just need you." Those words became my anchor. I worked tirelessly to build a life worthy of her faith in me. By day, I climbed the ladder at a small marketing firm, working late nights, taking every freelance job I could find. By night, I studied for certifications, pushing myself until my eyes blurred. Slowly, the one-bedroom apartment became a two-bedroom. The broken-down car became a reliable SUV. The woman James once called broken built something he could never have imagined. Stability. By the time Lila turned 15, I had more than stability. I had success. I had worked my way into an executive position at a prestigious agency, the kind James used to name drop at dinner parties. My home was warm and filled with light, a place where laughter echoed in the halls. And Lila? She blossomed. She was top of her class, captain of the debate team, a girl with fire in her eyes and a voice that could silence a room. Every award she won, every smile she flashed, felt like vindication. I had given her everything James said I couldn't. For years, I never heard from him. No letters, no calls, no apologies. He vanished from my life as though I'd never existed. Part of me assumed he remarried, found a woman who could give him the children he craved. Sometimes I'd wonder if he ever thought of me at all, but then I'd look at Lila, and the wondering didn't matter. He didn't deserve to know her. He didn't deserve to know me. And then he came back. It was a crisp autumn morning when I saw him again. I was standing outside the courthouse, having just wrapped up a campaign pitch for a non-profit client. The crowd of people blurred around me, but there he was, older, heavier, his hair thinner, his once proud shoulders slumped. For a moment, I didn't recognize him. The James I remembered was sharp-suited, commanding, arrogant. This man looked tired. He spotted me before I could duck away. His eyes widened and he hurried across the street, nearly tripping on the curb. "Claire," he called, his voice desperate, nothing like the man who used to sneer at me. My stomach clenched. For a heartbeat, I considered pretending I didn't know him, but I stood frozen as he reached me. "Claire," he gasped out of breath. "I've been looking for you." I blinked at him, my jaw tightening. "Why?" He hesitated, his eyes darting around as though searching for the right words. "Because I made a mistake. I was wrong." About everything his voice cracked, and I realized with a jolt that his hands were trembling. I wanted to laugh, 15 years of silence, and now he was suddenly contrite? But before I could respond, he added the words that made my blood run cold. I heard you have a daughter. For a long moment, the noise of the street faded. Just his words hung in the air, heavy and poisonous. I steadied my breath, forcing my face into an unreadable mask. You heard wrong, I lied. But James smirked. Not the cruel smirk I remembered, but a pathetic shadow of it. Don't lie to me, Claire. People talk. I know she's not mine, but I want to meet her. That was when it hit me. He hadn't come for me. He hadn't come for forgiveness. He came because he wanted something. Maybe it was redemption. Maybe it was to patch up the gaping hole his ego couldn't ignore. But whatever it wasn't love. It wasn't family. It was need. I turned to leave, but his hand shot out, gripping my arm. Please, he begged, his voice breaking. Don't shut me out. I need this. I need to meet her. I pulled free, my heart hammering. I wanted to scream at him, to throw every insult he'd ever hurled back in his face. But instead, I walked away without a word, because I knew something he didn't. He thought Lila was my weakness, but she was my greatest strength. And if he thought he could waltz back into our lives after mocking me, after abandoning me, after 15 years of silence, he was in for the cruelest surprise of his life. I thought ignoring James would be enough. I thought that if I turned my back and refused to acknowledge him, he'd wither away into the shadows of my past where he belonged. But men like James don't vanish easily. They circle. They push. They dig their claws in wherever they sense weakness. It started with letters, slid under the door of my office. Claire, please, I just want to talk. Then came the calls, blocked numbers I refused to answer. And then he found out where Lila went to school. The first time I saw him waiting at the gate, leaning against the fence as students streamed past, my blood ran cold. Lila spotted him before I did. She walked up to my car, her face pale, her voice trembling as she said, Mom, there was a man who asked me if my name was Lila. My chest tightened so hard I could barely breathe. I wanted to protect her innocence, her peace, her beautiful bubble of safety I had built for her all these years. But James had already cracked it. That night, I sat Lila down at the kitchen table, and for the first time, I told her the truth. Not all of it, not the cruelest words, not the humiliation, but enough. Enough for her to understand why a stranger thought he had a right to her. She listened quietly, her eyes steady, her jaw tight. When I finished, she reached across the table and squeezed my hand. You don't have to explain, Mom. If he hurt you, then I don't want anything to do with him. My throat burned with pride and sorrow all at once. But James wasn't done. Within weeks, he escalated. One morning, I opened my mailbox to find a thick envelope stamped with legal insignia. My hands shook as I tore it open. Inside were papers. James had filed a petition for visitation rights. He was demanding access to a child who wasn't even his, a child he had mocked me for never being able to have. I could hardly process the audacity. The man who once sneered at adoption, who laughed at the idea of raising someone else's mistake, now wanted to step into the role of doting father to a girl he had no part in creating or raising. It was almost comical if it weren't so infuriating. I called Melissa that night, my voice shaking with rage. She listened patiently, then said, Claire, this isn't about love. This is about ego. He doesn't want Lila. He wants the image of Lila. He wants to rewrite his story. Her words settled deep into my bones. She was right. James wasn't chasing family. He was chasing redemption in the eyes of others. Court dates followed, each one a battlefield. James showed up in press suits, his graying hair slicked back, his expression carefully crafted into something pitiable. He painted himself as a changed man, a father desperate for connection, a husband who had lost his way, but wanted to make amends. And there I was, painted as the bitter ex-wife who cruelly withheld a daughter out of spite. The gall of it nearly broke me, but I had something he didn't, truth. And truth, I knew, was heavier than any of his theatrics. When the judge asked why I refused him, I laid it out in detail. I told the court about the years of mockery, the cruelty, the dismissal. I presented letters from old friends who had witnessed his jabs. I presented records of his absence. I even brought the adoption papers that showed, in black and white, that Lila was mine and mine alone. James squirmed in his chair as I spoke, but he never once looked me in the eye. Still, the process dragged on. James wasn't just fighting in court. He was fighting in the court of public opinion. He spread rumors in the community, claiming I was unstable, that I had brainwashed Lila against him. He reached out to relatives we hadn't spoken to in years, spinning tales of how I was cruelly denying him the right to be a father. People whispered. Some believed him. Others avoided me altogether. It was exhausting, humiliating, infuriating. But through it all, Lila stood firm. She refused to speak to him. She told her friends with a calmness that stunned me, "That man isn't my dad. My mom is my only parent." Hearing her say that filled me with both pride and guilt. Pride that she saw me so clearly. Guilt that she even had to say those words because of his intrusion. One evening, after yet another grueling day in court, I sat alone in the kitchen long after Lila had gone to bed. The house was silent. The hum of the refrigerator the only sound. My hands trembled as I held a glass of wine, staring at the reflection of my tired face in the window. 15 years I had built this life. 15 years I had kept him out. 15 years I had carried the weight of his words and proved them wrong. And now, here he was, trying to claw back into my world as if he had any right. My rage boiled over, sharper than it had been even when I left him, because this time, it wasn't just about me. This time, he was coming for my daughter, my Lila. And I realized then, with a clarity that cut like glass, that this wasn't just about defense anymore. It was about offense. James had mocked me for being infertile. He had mocked me for being broken. But I had a chance now, a chance to show him just how whole I had become without him. A chance to deliver a blow so devastating he would never recover. And I promised myself as I drained that glass that when the time came, I would not hesitate. The final court hearing arrived like a storm I had been bracing for my entire life. By then, months of legal sparring had worn me thin, but they had also steeled me. I walked into the courtroom not as the fragile young woman who once flinched under James's words, but as a mother with 15 years of armor, forged in fire. Lila was with me that day, not as a child to be shielded, but as a young woman, ready to stand in her own truth. She wore a blazer we'd picked out together, her hair tied neatly back, her eyes steady and unflinching. As she slipped her hand into mine before the judge entered, I felt a current of strength pass between us. This wasn't just my fight anymore, it was ours. James sat across the aisle, his suit crisp, his face carefully arranged into an expression of remorse. But beneath the performance, I saw the flicker of desperation, the hollow man who had lost everything and was grasping at the only thread of dignity he thought remained. His lawyer spun a story about redemption, about a father's aching desire to know his child, about mistakes made in youth that deserved forgiveness. It was practiced, polished, almost convincing. But then, it was my turn. I stood, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my fingertips, and I told the court the truth. Not the sanitized truth I had shared before, but the raw, unflinching reality. I spoke of the years of ridicule, the cruel jokes at dinner tables, the way James had weaponized my infertility to break me down piece by piece. I described the night I left, carrying nothing but a suitcase and a heart that still somehow beat, despite being shredded. I described the miracle of holding Lila for the first time, of fighting tooth and nail to give her a life he never believed I could. As I spoke, James shifted in his seat, his jaw tightening, his eyes darting anywhere but at me. But the courtroom was silent. Every ear tuned to my voice, every heart pounding with mine. And then came the moment that would shatter him beyond repair. The judge asked if Lila wished to speak. She rose from her chair, her voice clear, her words sharp as knives. "This man is not my father," she said, staring directly at James. "He mocked my mom for years. He abandoned her. He never wanted me. And now that I'm here, now that I've grown up to be someone he can parade around, suddenly he wants to play dad. Number. He doesn't get that. My mom is my only parent. She's the only one who earned the right to stand beside me. He is nothing to me." The words hung in the air like a gavel strike, final and irrevocable. James's face crumpled. For a moment, I saw the mask slip, and what lay beneath wasn't anger, it was ruin. His shoulders sagged, his mouth opened as if to protest, but no sound came. The judge cleared his throat, shuffled the papers on his desk, and ruled in my favor. Petition denied. Case dismissed. James had no legal claim, no emotional claim, no place in our lives. As the gavel came down, a weight lifted from my chest that I hadn't even realized I was still carrying. 15 years of echoes, broken, barren, worthless, dissolved into nothing. I had won. But the real victory came later, outside the courthouse. James cornered me in the parking lot, his face streaked with sweat, his voice hoarse. "Claire, please," he begged, the arrogance gone, replaced by a pitiful desperation. I just want a second chance. I want to meet her. I want to know her." I looked at him for a long moment, studying the man who had once convinced me I was less than whole. He was smaller now, diminished, not the towering figure who haunted my memories. And I realized with startling clarity that I felt nothing for him. No rage, no longing, no grief, just emptiness. "You mocked me for being infertile," I said quietly. "You mocked me for being broken, but I wasn't broken. I was building a life you'll never touch. And the daughter you begged me not to bring into this world, she's the proof you were wrong." His eyes widened, and before he could speak again, I walked away, Lila's hand in mine, leaving him standing in the shadow of his own destruction. For the first time in years, I felt free. Free from his laughter, free from his judgment, free from the chains he had tried to wrap around my soul. Lila and I drove home in silence, the windows down, the wind carrying away the last remnants of his voice from my mind. And as we pulled into the driveway, she looked at me and said softly, "You did it, Mom. We did it." And I realized she was right. This wasn't just my victory, it was ours. So I'll leave you with this. If someone mocked you at your lowest, stripped you of your dignity, and tried to rewrite your story years later to make themselves the hero, would you forgive them? Or would you let them drown in the ruins of the life they destroyed? I know what I chose. What would you do?